But we begin this morning with severe weather that continues to wreak havoc across the country, impacting millions of people.
Yeah, and more storms are actually expected today in the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Today's threat comes after a lot of trouble yesterday, including a deadly tornado that swept through Missouri. At least 5 people were killed and several others were hurt. It also left behind widespread destruction. A large tornado also caused serious damage in Louisville, Kentucky yesterday. And the National Weather Service says it's surveying to try to figure out if a second tornado also touched down. And in Illinois, a strong storm there caused damage as well. Several homes were leveled, but thankfully no serious injuries were reported there. NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has the latest on this next round of severe weather.
Hey guys, good morning from Glen Allen, Missouri. The devastation in this rural community, absolutely astounding. And case in point, you can see we're standing in the middle of what we're told was the Glen Allen fire station. And now it's basically just a big concrete slab with a bunch of debris kind of scattered all over it. You can see a ladder that firefighters apparently used. You can see firefighters' uniforms here in the background. 5 people in this small rural community a couple hours south of St. Louis killed by this EF2 tornado that scientists now say roared through early yesterday morning with winds topping 100 miles per hour. 5 more injured, close to 90 homes destroyed. That tornado, one of close to a dozen that scientists now say touched down across Illinois, Missouri, and Indiana yesterday. That outbreak being just the latest outbreak to slam portions of the Midwest and South over the last few weeks, leaving a death count at this point overall of dozens. Close to 480 tornado reports now reported across 25 states this year to date. That is twice, for reference, the average for this time of year. And on top of that, we have 61 tornado-related deaths. The average for an entire year is 71. Guys, I'll send it back to you.
Wow, just incredible destruction there. Maggie, thank you.
Now, for the latest on the storms bringing heavy rains and damaging winds, let's check in with NBC's meteorologist, Michelle Grossman.
A lot going on. Good morning, Michelle.
There's a lot going on. Hi there, guys. So good to see you. And the good news is we're not going to see that widespread tornadic activity that we saw the past 36 hours. It's still the same storm system, still the same long cold front that we're watching, but we're moving into more stable air. So the threat today will be the winds and also really heavy rain. And then we're going to see this cold front kind of get stuck. It's going to park itself in the south. So we're going to have a flooding concern as well. Speaking of flooding, we do have 7 million impacted by flood alerts. Where you see the green, that is a flood watch. Flash flood warning is in red. We will see those in and out as we go throughout the day because we're watching heavy rain along this cold front. And also we're going to see some storms too. I'll show you that in just a minute. But this is what it looks like on radar right now. You can see lots of lightning along this front. So we still have a lot of energy with it too. And we're seeing that heavy rain as well, where you see those brighter colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, especially throughout portions of the southern plains into the Tennessee Valley, even creeping into the Ohio Valley. We're looking at some really heavy rain. And this is going to continue over not just today, tomorrow, but also Saturday. So we're talking about 3 days of some really heavy rainfall. We could see rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. So we do have that flood threat. We have a flash flood risk as well, and that's really dangerous. If you're in a flash flood area, you want to heed any warnings. Be careful. Do not drive in any flash flooding or any flooding, really. So we're going to see multiple rounds of storms, high rainfall rates, especially where you see those darker blue colors. That's a slight risk. That means we have a better chance of seeing some flash flooding there. That includes Austin, San Antonio, Victoria, Corpus Christi, and then portions of Mississippi, also Alabama, so Baton Rouge and the Jackson, Mississippi. And that is today. We're going to add on to that tomorrow and then on Saturday. And that's because we're expecting even up to 6 inches of rain in some spots. Those oranges and reds once again showing us where the heaviest amounts will fall, parts of Texas into Louisiana, Mississippi, and then even up through the Carolinas, Raleigh, North Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina. You could see some really heavy rain as well. And that's where that front's going to be draped, just parked over that area. We're also looking at the chance for severe weather. Again, the tornado risk is low. That doesn't mean we can't have one, but the tornado risk is low compared to what we saw the past 36 hours. The main threats with these storms will be 60-mile-per-hour winds, isolated hail, not quite as large as what we saw with the storms just a day and a half ago. We're looking at an inch or larger. The best chances for storms this afternoon would be in parts of Salisbury, Maryland, and to Richmond, Virginia, also Roanoke. But you could see any storms within the mid-Atlantic, from Atlantic City down to Charlotte. Even New York City could see some storms as well. This is a setup here. We have more storms. We have heavy rain. It's that cold front that's moving slowly across the country, now making its impact from the northeast into portions of the southern plains. So showers and strong storms in the mid-Atlantic, soaking rain for areas near the western Gulf Coast. That is today, and that will be tomorrow and also Saturday. Because look what happens. It sinks a little to the south, it sinks a little to the east, but then it sort of stalls a bit. So we're going to see that stalled front bring more rain to the southeast, increasing that flood risk for eastern Texas and Louisiana. That includes that chance for flash flooding as well. You can see all that rain in portions of the Gulf Coast. And then as we get to Saturday, kicking off our holiday weekend, we're looking at wet weather continuing throughout the southeast. Even up to the Carolinas, Virginia, notice just south of Norfolk, Virginia, we have some pretty heavy rain there on Saturday, and localized flooding continues to be possible on Saturday. So for today, this is the big picture. We have that cold front. That's really the big story, the big weather story of the day. So some strong to severe storms in the mid-Atlantic, that flood risk throughout portions of the Gulf, the southeast. Ahead of this front, we're looking at record highs. We could reach 80 degrees today in New York City, 80s in the mid-Atlantic, really warm in the southeast, parts of Florida as well. Back behind it, it's a different story. We have that cold air in place, that April chill, temperatures only in the 30s in the northern plains. Remember all that snow we had there the past day and a half. Temperatures in the 30s and 40s in the upper Midwest. It's cool too in the central plains, but at least it's sunny. The upper Midwest getting a break too. That's great news. Lots of sunshine. Sunny in the Southwest. We're looking at temperatures in the 70s and 80s. A nice day there. But notice the Pacific Northwest. You see some green, some brighter colors too. That's indicating a new Pacific storm coming onshore. And you know that means it moves cross country, and that's going to be our next weather maker. So let's talk about those temperatures. We have that cold front with the warm winds ahead of it. It's pulling off that Gulf moisture. We're looking at 81 today in New York City, 25 degrees above what is typical for this time of year. Feeling very summer-like. That's going to help give some energy to any storms that come through. D.C. 85, 22 degrees above average, and 87 in April in Raleigh. Back behind it, we're looking at temperatures only in the 30s in Minneapolis, 14 degrees below average. So that is not typical for this time of year. Chicago, St. Louis, Cincinnati, we're looking at temperatures in the 50s. Nashville, 55. That'll be 12 degrees below average. Back to you guys.
I mean, Michelle, they say April showers, and it looks like we can't get enough of this rain, right?
I know we're going to have a lot of May flowers.
Yeah,
that's how I look at it.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle Grossman.
Sure.
All right, turning now to Washington. Former Vice President Mike Pence will not appeal a federal judge's order to comply with a subpoena. That is according to one of his advisors.
The subpoena is related to the investigation into former President Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the 2020 election. The investigation is being led by special counsel Jack Smith. For more, we're joined by NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Danny, good morning. So, interesting timeline here because the judge essentially made this decision last week, but the subpoena came in February. So, talk to us about how Pence's testimony could be significant to the special counsel investigation, the pros and cons here.
Well, on the one hand, it could be said that we know a lot of what Pence would testify to. It's been out in the public, but the special counsel is looking for anything else that may have gone on between Pence and Trump. And the reason I find this case so fascinating is that it deals with some bedrock constitutional issues that we don't really deal with that often. The speech or debate clause does not come up very often. But another really fascinating thing is that the vice president is barely a member of the executive branch. His salary is paid for out of the Senate budget. The president can't fire the vice president. There are many historical points that tend to suggest that in many ways the vice president is equally a member of the legislative branch as the executive branch. For example, he only recently got an office in the White House. He used to be in the Capitol. And I'm talking like Walter Mondale, I believe, was the first one with offices in the White House. So this is really a fascinating legal issue, but Pence not appealing signals that he is taking a political approach. He could appeal, but maybe this is sort of him showing, hey, I'll put up a little fight, but I'm not going to fight this to the very end. I'm going to come in and comply. And that probably aids what he thinks will be a good strategy for his own candidacy should he choose to run.
And that's a good distinction. There are protections that the vice president has constitutionally.
Yeah, let's talk about that speech and debate clause. Actually, the Pence team is sort of touting this as a bit of a victory here, a partial victory at least. But Pence has already talked about this. He wrote a book that covered this extensively. What more are they hoping to learn here?
They're really looking to learn. First of all, it's speech or debate clause, everyone. I want a memo to go out because everyone says speech and debate. It's speech or debate. I don't know why they drafted it that way.
Well,
it might have been that old-timey language.
Yeah.
Who knows, right? It's very confusing. I think it should be speech and debate because you want them both included. So this is as I said, we already know most of what Pence is going to say. But it is possible that there were conversations that Pence had with Trump. And when he comes in to testify before the grand jury, he's going to have to bear all. And we may never know what it is he says unless it finds its way into an indictment. If Jack Smith is smart, if he really wants him to be forthcoming, he will make sure that that never comes out and he doesn't even use it in the indictment and it stays only within the grand jury walls, because this is a grand jury I don't expect is going to have a lot of leakage, unless, of course, as a witness, Pence could always come out and put on a press conference, and there's no bar to him talking about what he testified to.
Right.
I don't see that happening.
Political speech. And obviously, we don't know when Pence will testify in front of the grand jury, though he is a top contender for the 2024 race. We're expecting him to put his hat in. So briefly here, Danny, what are the next steps in the investigation if he testifies?
Yeah, the Jack Smith, as with all these investigations, particularly Jack Smith's, it's difficult to say what the next steps are because it's done in secret. And nobody does secret investigations better than the federal government, and specifically within the federal government, special counsel, because they're even walled off from the other prosecutors in DOJ. They are in a bubble, a true bubble. And so this is not the kind of thing that they're going to reveal. They don't give press conferences to say, here's where we are in our investigation. I know this from being a criminal defense attorney, is that you often don't know if a grand jury is going to indict your client until they indict your client. They don't send out a letter saying, hey, you're in the clear. They don't like to do that because who knows, maybe somewhere down the road they'll develop more information. So it's very difficult to forecast what the special counsel is doing. But from outward observations, seems like they're moving along.
And judging from the Mar-a-Lago speech on Tuesday, it seems like this investigation is at top of Trump's mind right now. All right, Danny Spalos, thanks so much. All right, turning now to the fallout this morning from former President Donald Trump's arraignment on those felony charges. Trump's legal team is now preparing for the long road ahead after he pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records on Tuesday. This makes him the first president in history to be charged with a crime. His lawyers have until August 8th to file any motions, including the expected motion to dismiss. Meanwhile, after the battle is shaping up and when the battle is shaping up over when the trial will actually be held, prosecutors have asked that it start in January of 2024, but Trump's team, they're pushing back. They want it later into the spring of 2024. Whatever the date they end up settling on, the beginning of that trial will likely coincide with the former president being right in the middle of the 2024 presidential campaign. For more on all this, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns in West Palm Beach, Florida. Dasha, good morning to you. So let's talk about the presidential race. How could this indictment affect Trump's actual campaigning, and what's the outlook that these charges could have on these other candidates, the ones who are already in the race and the ones who may join in?
Well, Stephen, I'll tell you how a Republican operative put it to me recently. He said, right now in the Republican Party, there is no anti-Trump lane. Those doors are closing, and they're closing fast. And you've seen that as even his opponents and potentially soon-to-be opponents in the Republican primary have all rallied around him, attacking the DA and supporting the former president here. And in the hours and the days since the indictment came down, according to the Trump campaign, they tell me that they've now raised $12 million, telling me that about a third of those donations are brand new donors, saying they've also signed up 25,000 volunteers. And if those numbers are accurate, that is a huge data point to show not only are those Republican allies in Congress and Republican operatives, Republican big names in the party circling around him to support him, but that he's also getting grassroots support around this. So the campaign is really trying to use this moment, trying to use this indictment to galvanize support and to help propel him politically here.
And Dasha, as Trump gets ready for these several legal battles ahead, he's also calling on Congress to defund the DOJ, the FBI. Of course, that's despite widespread GOP outrage over groups that were calling defunding of local police departments. So how are Republicans responding to his requests?
Well, some are brushing it off as a terrible idea, but there are others who are in power to potentially do so. The Kevin McCarthys of Congress, Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman James Comer, who are actively talking about the possibility of using the purse strings of Congress to strip federal funding from DA Bragg. So we'll see if that actually becomes a reality, but the conversations are being had.
And we're also learning more about these threats I wanted to ask you about to Judge Merchan's family. Just 2 days after the former president targeted them, spoke about them at that Mar-a-Lago speech. What more do we know about those threats?
Well, we were waiting to see what the former president would say in his speech, because earlier that very day, everyone involved in the case was told by the judge, look, I'm going to be watching for charged rhetoric that could potentially incite violence. He didn't go so far as to issue a gag order prioritizing First Amendment rights, especially for a current candidate for president. Let's not forget that very important piece of context here. But of course, that very night, the former president again going after the DA and going after the judge. That could complicate matters for Trump's legal team, but it is red meat for the base. This is something that the former president is want to do. We've seen him attack just about every official that has ever undercut him, that he's ever felt like has gone after him in any way. That's prosecutors, judges, federal officials, state officials, local officials. So this is nothing new, but perhaps this time, Stephen, the stakes are a little bit higher. So his lawyers may be concerned about it, but I don't expect that we'll see him tone down that rhetoric anytime soon.
Higher stakes and more complications. All right, Dasha, thank you.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has become the most senior American leader in decades to meet with Taiwan's president on U.S. soil. The leaders met yesterday at the Reagan Library in California, despite strong protests from China, which considers the island part of its territory. Speaking after the meeting, Taiwan's president said she was grateful for the U.S. support.
It is no secret that today, the peace that we have maintained and the democracy which have worked hard to build are facing unprecedented challenges. I reiterated Taiwan's commitment to defending the peaceful status quo. Taiwan is grateful to have the United States of America by our side as we confront the unique challenges of our time.
NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us now, along with foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer, who's in Beijing. Good morning to you both. So, Ryan, I want to start with you. First, can you just walk us through yesterday's meeting? What exactly did both leaders discuss?
Well, what they really talked about, Zingle, was the continued commitment that the United States has to developing a very careful relationship with Taiwan. Of course, the U.S. does have a strict adherence to the one China policy, which dictates that China is in control of Taiwan, but at the same time wants to allow Taiwan to exist as a democratic state. And you heard Kevin McCarthy talk about a lot of things, and that includes the sale of weapons to Taiwan as something that the United States plans to continue to do. Take a listen to McCarthy's remarks.
We must continue the arms sales to Taiwan and make sure such sales reach Taiwan on a very timely basis. Second, we must strengthen our economic cooperation, particularly with trade and technology. Third, we must continue to promote our shared values on the world stage.
And I want to point out the people standing behind Kevin McCarthy in that shot. There were a number of Democrats. This was certainly a bipartisan congressional delegation to meet with the Taiwanese president, a signal that the United States government, both Republicans and Democrats, continue to support Taiwan's effort to have at least some level of independence separate from China.
And Janice, I want to bring you in here. We know Beijing, not surprisingly, has condemned this meeting. Tell us a bit more about that reaction and whether or not we should be bracing for any retaliation in the Taiwan Strait.
Well, Chinese officials were condemning the meeting before it even happened, issuing the threats of retaliation that you would expect, accusing the U.S. of, quote, conniving to support Taiwan independence by hosting this meeting on American soil. You'll recall last summer when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, there were unprecedented Chinese military drills in response. They effectively blockaded the island. There's the possibility that that could happen again, but for now, it appears to be a restrained response. There is some activity in the area. There's a Chinese aircraft carrier in the region, as well as Chinese jets flying over the strait. But officials in Beijing today almost scoffed at the idea that there would be this massive military response. And they've hinted at Beijing using a different playbook. And it's why it's important in looking at the reaction to widen the lens, so to speak, on everything else that was happening here today with high-profile visits and China really trying to position itself as more of a global diplomatic player.
And Janice, obviously, this is in the context of already strained relations between the U.S. and China. So what are the implications here for the United States?
Well, China had warned that there could be severe implications for the U.S.-China relationship, which is already at a low. There are no talks on any issue between the U.S. and China, not even climate change. You contrast that with what has been a parade of high-profile visitors to Beijing over the past couple of weeks. The leaders of Germany, Brazil, Spain, the foreign ministers from Japan and New Zealand, and today, French President Emmanuel Macron arriving for a 3-day state visit. He's down the street right now having dinner with Xi Jinping. He'll have 6 hours of private meetings with Xi, and in that time he wants to use it to be able to influence Xi Jinping to use his clout with Vladimir Putin to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine. I talk about all of this because it's important to show that there are now several countries that are approaching China differently than the U.S. in trying to forge ahead with relations.
Ryan, Janice, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.